Hello and welcome to this Info Security Magazine webinar. My name is James Coker, reporter at Info Security Magazine, and I'll be moderating this afternoon's session, which is sponsored by Red Button. For the next 60 minutes, we're going to be discussing the topic securing your system against the next DDoS attack. Before I introduce you to our panelists, there's just a couple of quick housekeeping points. We'll be running some polls throughout the session, so please do join in with those as and when they appear. No right or wrong answers on those. We're just very interested to get your views. Also, please do use the submit a question function to let us know of any questions you might have, and also let us know if a question is for a particular presenter, and we'll do our best to answer those later on in the session. And finally, for those of you on Twitter, our hashtag is InfoSecWebinar, so please feel free to join in the discussion on social media as well. And a quick note about Cpe Credits. This webcast qualifies listeners for 1 Cpe credit based on a minimum attendance time of 50, that's 50 minutes. And once you've done that, you can download your certificate from your Info Security account and submit it. And further instructions can be found on the event platform. And please note, certificates take 48 hours to be processed and will be made available to download the following day. So before we kick on with the session, I just want to introduce our speakers for today. We have Ziv Gaydot, who is founder and CEO at Red Button, Professor Kevin Curran, who is Senior IEEE member and Professor of Cybersecurity at Ulster University, and Dominic Grunden, who is CISO for Union Digital Bank and a Club CISO member. So a really good panel for this topic. So to kick things off, I'm just going to launch our first poll question of the afternoon, which is, has your organization experienced a ransom DDoS attack or RDDoS attack during the past 2 years? So really since the pandemic started. And the options for this are A, yes, multiple, B, yes, 1 or 2, C, no, or D, not sure. So that's just gone live. So please do give us your thoughts and we'll review the answers shortly. But without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Ziv, who will be giving us an opening presentation. Over to you, Ziv.
Okay, thank you. Thank you and hi everyone. My name is Ziv Gaydot. I'm the founder and CEO of Red Button. Red Button was established 8 years ago, and we have one goal, which is DDoS, helping organizations to be prepared for DDoS attacks. We have several services. The first one is DDoS testing. We have our own proprietary platform for testing, control testing organizations and finding gaps. Once we find the gaps, we move to the hardening phase, where we help organizations to configure their platforms, the mitigation platforms, improve their architecture, add protection until they are ready for DDoS attacks. Then, once we are happy with the technology part, we also believe that we should invest in the personnel and the IT, and we provide training, configuration, procedures, and make sure that the IT is ready to withstand their next DDoS attack. And last but not least, when one of our customers is under attack, we provide incident response 24/7. Red Button itself do not manufacture mitigation technology. Instead, we rely on all those big names down here, all the vendors, and we are completely agnostic or neutral with respect to those vendors, and we help organizations to maximize the vendor that they have. Specifically, we are one of select companies that are trusted and allowed to conduct DDoS testing against any environment in AWS. And that's it. Now, in order to make the discussion today vivid, I decided to go for a case study. I think it will give an example on how a DDoS attack, and specifically an RDDoS, a ransom DDoS campaign looks like from an organization point of view. And in this case study, the organization that approached us, and this organization was not a customer of us before this event, it was a Latin American bank, and they received an extortion email like so many others do. But in addition to the email, in addition to the demand for a Bitcoin, and if they would not pay the Bitcoin amount, they will be attacked. This is what the email said. So in addition to the threat itself, that was of course severe, they also had an attack shortly after the email arrived. And the attack was on the same day, and then they engaged us, and not immediately, but we were eventually activated, but still before the attack date was planning to be. So in terms of timeline, on July 12th, they received the email and the attack. The attack was a 60 gigabits UDP flat. Actually, it's not that dramatic today. Today, we see attacks which are above 100 gigabits per second, and much more, of course. The attack lasted for 6 hours. It had outage. It caused outage because they had to activate their mitigation. They had a scrubbing center, and since it came with some surprise, it took them some time to do the activation, specifically the Cpe diversion, and there was some outage. But then after the attack happened, they understood that this is a serious threat, and they assumed that this is like knocking on the door, and the real attack can happen on the due date, which was actually on the 18th. The attacker promised that the 18th is going to be the day of the attack if they would not pay the ransom amount. We were activated on the 15th, a few days after, and our job is to prepare the organization for the worst. And we assume that on the 18th, or maybe before, or maybe after, there is going to be a severe attack, with much bigger in terms of bandwidth, with higher vectors, and not only network attacks, but also application attacks and some other DDoS attack techniques. And we need to prepare the organization for that event. To do so, we first have to understand what they have, what the servers, what services, what mitigation, protection. Bear in mind that they were not a customer of us before, so we have to do it very, very quickly. And once we understand it, we have to build what we call a playbook. So we need to understand what we are going to do in each scenario: in a network attack, in application attack, low and slow, direct to origin, direct to router, etc. And we started to build that, and we did that pretty much on the daytime. And on the nighttime, we had a window. We received a window from the organization to start DDoS testing. And this is something that we do, and I recommend to do when you receive a ransom threat, because you don't want to wait for the attack to do for the due date and for the attacker to test you. You want to first make sure that you can withstand whatever is going to happen on the 18th. So we did the test. This was test number 1. And honestly, on the mitigation side, everything worked well. The provider, the scrubbing center, was mitigating everything as expected. But on the network side, they had a lot of issues. As mentioned before, they are using a scrubbing center. They are diverting the traffic using BGP. And for those who are familiar, there are always issues with that. So they had to resolve, they had some traffic leaking. So some of the attack was leaking because the routing was not perfect. They had some other routing issues, fragmentation issues. And at some point, we just kept the attack running for 2 hours straight. And the IT was fixing one issue after another until the maintenance window was over. We had to stop the attack, but we felt that we're at much better phase now than we were in the beginning of the evening, and we had to stop then. A day after, we reconvened, and they also, the network team used the daytime to fix some other issues that they discovered, and we did another attack on the second day. And on that day, let alone few issues that they fixed during the attack, everything was working as expected, and also on the mitigation side, on the network side, on the performance side. And you can really see how the confidence of the organization is increasing from the first day that we have met them, and now we are already after 2 attacks, after many issues have been 2 simulation attacks, after many network issues have been resolved, and we felt, and I believe the organization felt, that we are ready to for the attack to happen. Now, we only attack on the network side because on the application side, they did have a cloud WAF, but we understood it would not be possible to upload their services to the cloud WAF, to divert the service to cloud WAF, because they had to issue certificates and to do testing and so on. So we had prepared for, we weren't able to be ready for an application attack on the cloud WAF, but we had prepared some responses if we will be attacked on the application level. And then we basically waited for the attack. And actually on the 17th, one day before the attack happened again. This was strike number 2. The same thing, volumetric attack, 60 gigabits. Now it lasted for 24 hours, exactly 24 hours. And it was the same attack. Again, it's not a big attack. 60 gigabits is not that big in today's standard. And since it was the same attack as before, since we did all the preparation, there was no disruption. On the due date of the attack, on the 18th, nothing happened. So we were ready to see if there will be an attack on the 18th, on the 19th, on the 20th, and after that we thought that, okay, this is over, and we're probably over this threat. Now I have to say that in some cases, yes, there can be a very severe attack, but in other cases, there could be an attack which is not that dramatic. And in other cases, you can receive RDDoS, ransom DDoS email, and there will be no attack at all. So it was an idle threat. But you don't know this when you receive the first email. So after the event was pretty much over, just keep in mind that the application protection was not yet enabled. So it took the organization about 2 weeks to issue the certificates, upload the services to the cloud WAF. And then on the August 17th, we did the last test, test number 3, and we tested the application level, and it was working very well as well. Okay, so the main things that we did here, maybe just like a summary, and the recommendations that we had for the customer is, one, we did DDoS testing during the attack, and we recommended them to keep doing DDoS testing at least once a year. We configured with the customer all the mitigations. At first, the network protection, the scrubbing center, and then the cloud WAF. There was another aspect to it. They had a DNS server on-prem, and only a single DNS. And this is like a point of failure, because if the attacker will attack a DNS, and it's very easy to take down a DNS with a DDoS attack, it will cause the entire service to collapse. So we recommended them to add another DNS service in addition to the existing one, and it could be any one of the multiple managed DNS services that are offered today out there. And another aspect here is the automation of the diversion. So they diverted under the attack, they diverted the traffic to the scrubbing center manually, and we gave them a recommendation that they can automate that, and then they just save, instead of 15 minutes of diversion time, manual diversion time can take just maybe 2 minutes. So in case of an attack, the outage will be none or very, very minimal. So this specific case study had a happy ending, especially because the attack was not that serious, honestly. But in some cases, we have been called or invoked where there was some serious outage. And I want to give our take. What are the three main reasons for customers have outage, even though they have already invested sometimes quite a lot in DDoS mitigation technologies. So the first reason, and this is really a no-brainer, I think, is that still organizations today, they don't do DDoS testing. They do a lot of pen testing, but they don't do DDoS testing, and I don't think you can expect your DDoS protection to work if you don't test it periodically. I typically like to say that DDoS protection or DDoS mitigation without DDoS testing is like developing software without QAing that. This is the recommendation that I have. The second reason is that the mitigation technologies that organizations possess is not configured well. Sometimes we find it really in like factory setting, and sometimes it is configured, but it's not maximized. It's like, let's say it's like on 40 or 50% of what you can get out of what you bought, and we try to push those organizations to be at 80% or 90 or 100%. So this is another aspect that I recommend to any organization to work on. And finally, it's also about the human factor. And let me give an example. That it could happen that there is an attack in 2 a.m. and the NOC engineer does not realize that this is a DDoS attack or does not respond well to the attack, and only at 8 a.m. The organization understands that this was a DDoS attack, and they start to fix it, and there was 6 hours of outage. So sometimes with just basic training and basic procedures, you can prepare the team, your IT, to those events. Okay, thank you, James. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Sif. Really interesting presentation there about how DDoS attacks work and ways to mitigate and respond to them. And we'll definitely be exploring some of those themes in the discussion to follow. But I just want to take a quick look to the responses to our first poll question, which was, has your organization experienced a ransom DDoS attack during the past 2 years? And quite an interesting split. 11% said yes, multiple. 19% said yes, 1 or 2. So that's nearly a third of experienced at least one. 44% said no, and 25% said not sure. And Ziv, I was just wondering if I could get your quick reaction to that those poll results. Is that kind of the split you would expect to see on this topic?
I think so. It sounds reasonable. I would bet that the organizations that did receive DDoS ransom were more on the spectrum that they have something to lose, like banks, trading companies, e-commerce, ISPs, and gambling maybe, and some others are not that much of a target if they don't have much public internet facing, or they don't suffer too much from outage. So I think it's reasonable.
Thank you very much. And I'll launch our second poll question of the afternoon, which is, did your organization run DDoS testing during the past year? And the options for this are A, yes, multiple times, B, yes, once or twice, C, no, or D, not sure. So that's going live now. And once again, really appreciate your responses to that. So I'll dive straight into the discussion now. And I'll just firstly like to sort of ask you guys about some of the recent trends you've observed around DDoS attacks, which clearly appear to be surging in volume. So Kevin, if I could start with you, why do you think this DDoS in general is becoming an increasingly attractive method for cyber threat actors?
Well, two reasons. If we ignore nation state attacks, it's become, a method. It's because of cryptocurrencies. Up until a number of years ago, you just did it for kudos or because you were part of maybe whatever you want to cyber protest. But now you can make real money. Now you can cause damage. Now you can, of course, you can shame companies into paying you. And of course, that's where the hackers go. And it's relatively an easy way, a low technical way. You don't need your 0 days. You just need to find open resolvers. You just need to find a few sites which don't have scrubbing capabilities, really, which are not subscribed to protections, really, which again, if you have more bandwidth than is ingress, then you're okay. But just because there is money to be made, really, and it's of all the things I teach in my penetration testing with my students, the easiest thing is for them to use something like low orbit ion cannon and launch a DOS attack against some mini small website, in which we do. I had happily compiled a list of sites for my students to attack over the years, and these were these journals online which kept bombarding me with and wouldn't unsubscribe me. And if you don't subscribe me after one or two requests, they get added to my list of sites for students to happily go and conduct DOS to their heart's content. And no, I haven't a clear conscience on that. But of course, the larger sites have the scrubbing capabilities, but it really is effective. It's the easiest thing to do, really, is to launch something which fires off hundreds of thousands of packets per minute, sorry, depending who you are, without having to distribute it, denial of service again. So we're going to see it around for a long while because networks are extremely complex, and we still have so many networks out there which have poor configurations and don't adhere to best practice. So it's not going to disappear overnight.
No, definitely not. And Dom, what trends have you seen in regard to DDoS attacks? And is this something you've personally experienced in your various CISO and security leadership roles?
Well, I mean, there's quite a few different trends. I mean, I haven't experienced any of recent, but yes, definitely in the past. I think that they're naturally becoming even more increasingly attractive. And, to complement some panel members, they're attractive for, they become more sophisticated. They're actually even cheaper more than ever to carry out, right? And if we compound that on top of them just looking for some instant cash and crypto, it creates this very attractive combination of the ransomware and DDoS attacks combined. I think the trend is also fueled by our reliance on digital and the sheer amount of basically insecure IoT devices that cyber criminals can compromise and redirect those botnets for traffic for generating purposes. So that's one trend that I see very much. But then there's the whole stateside sponsored piece as well, where you're looking to impact critical infrastructure, financial markets, instability, and things like that.
Definitely. And just picking up on that theme of nation state sponsored DDoS. So as if we've obviously seen the awful events with the Russia-Ukraine conflict at the moment. To what extent have you sort of seen DDoS tactic used in the context of this conflict and what its impact has been?
So yes, is these we luckily so far our customers have not been affected by any direct attack. There have been many attacks like that before. I mean, DDoS attack as a state sponsor is not something new, and there were many events like that before. What we have seen is that our customers that are not in Ukraine but in the area have raised their alert level to a DDoS attack, and also just to give another example, one of our customers they have a bank branch in the United States, And they also requested us to do a quick DDoS test just to touch base, make sure what is the status there. So I think the reason the alert level is increasing, not only of course in the specific area in Ukraine, but also globally. There is some kind of preparation that we see.
Thank you very much. And Kevin, have you sort of seen any trends in the way this has been used in the conflict and indeed by nation state actors in general in recent times?
Yeah, well, the nation state ones are hard to attribute at times, but
Yeah.
we're just seeing higher volumes again. I'm amazed at the volumes that we have now, because generally anything above 100 gigs for a while was capped because of the Cisco routers, which were quite commonly used at the 100 gig kind of upper limit again. So you weren't seeing much beyond that. But of course, with botnets now and and some of the reflection attacks, you can turn 64 bytes into like 4,000K really. You got a 30x amplification again. Again, some of the earlier ones we have stopped. Some of the simpler reflection attacks again, but we haven't stopped source IP spoofing again. So again, there is documentation. RFC's BCP 38 is best current practice for that. It's actually 225 now, but we have areas like this again. But I'm just amazed at the increase in the actual. I remember Brian Krebs, the journalist. He was subject to one of the largest ones back then, but now we're seeing these quite commonly.
Thank you very much, Kevin. And now just turning to what we discussed in the first poll, really, the use of ransom DDoS. So really using DDoS to extort organisations, and the example which Ziv gave in his presentation. So Dom, is this a tactic you've sort of observed being utilised more, and does it offer particular advantages to cyber criminals compared to traditional ransomware infections?
Yeah, and I mean, James, first of all, if we look at it from a ransomware perspective, that's kind of taken the center stage of the cybercrime ecosystem, right? And then additionally, I think 2021 was also a record-breaking year for DDoS attacks as well. So when you combine those two, it's just basically a number of attack vectors are being used across that. I think cyber criminals are using DDoS as an effective ransom extortion technique. I think that rather spending a lot of time and careful planning and affecting an organization's network with malware or ransomware, they're basically taking an easier approach and using the DDoS as a ransom vector. For cyber criminals, also launching these compared to traditional ransomware, it's relatively more simple. It's harder to trace back its origin compared to ransomware, and it doesn't require them to gain access to a company's internal systems before the attack can be carried out. So I think it's quite beneficial to a cyber criminal from that perspective.
Absolutely, very very interesting trend. And Siv, just quickly, do you think ransom DDoS could become the dominant type of extortion method used by cyber criminals in the next few years?
I think that DDoS, ransom DDoS, will always be the smaller brother of other ransom attacks, of intrusion, encryption, but it is for large organization with a large internet footprint and that they cannot suffer outage. It's a very big threat. So for them, it's sometimes even a bigger threat than other type of cyber attacks or cyber ransom attacks.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that. And I'll just, before we move on with the discussion, I'll just take a look at the answers to the second poll question, which is, did your organization run a DDoS testing during the past year? So the answers we had back for that was 2% said yes multiple times, 13% once or twice, 40% said no, and 43% said not sure. So yeah, quite an interesting split there. And I'll just launch the third and final poll question of this afternoon, which is, has your organization adopted new security technologies to combat DDoS attacks in the past 2 years? And the options for this are A, yes, B, no, but this is something we are considering, C, no, we are satisfied with our current setup, or D, other. So that's also gone live now. And yeah, sort of moving on to that theme of ways to mitigate and respond to DDoS attacks. Kevin, what kind of are the biggest the biggest challenges security teams tend to experience when trying to prevent or respond to DDoS attacks?
One is pricing. You can provide overcapacity, of course, but then when you're looking at your cost as well, coming onto that, then, but in some ways, some of the choices become a little bit simpler. Everything is moving to the cloud. Every single thing, that we don't have the RN hardware that we had in the past, where you put in your whatever, you get it usually from the same provider off your network, Cisco, wherever else. But now everything's been based. So if you're on AWS, it kind of makes sense to use AWS tools, AWS Shield, whatever else. And depending on the cloud provider you're stuck with, you're kind of at the mercy of how good their protections are and their pricing models, whatever else. And then, of course, hackers are very adaptable over time, that they use a variety of tools, like they use slow and fast methods as well, which kind of go underneath the radar. They turn it off, they come back on again, that they know the settings generally within these systems, within these tools, of course, that they subscribe themselves, and they will do whatever else, and they were able to test these. So a lot of these are undetectable, but it's really down to, again, knowing what can be done. And again, it's a price trade-off between security and and pissing your line manager off.
Very interesting. I see you sort of nodding there, Dom. What's your thoughts on that, and measures that you think basic security measures organizations can introduce to mitigate DDoS attacks?
Yeah, no, I agree with the comments previously. I mean, a lot of it comes down to the diversity and complexity of the attacks, but also that kind of cost factor. But then also, I think with DDoS, to a certain extent, there's a lack of actionable intelligence, I think. But then also, to kind of make it a little bit worse, there's that whole false or contradicting information that floats around on the internet that I think complicates prevention even further. But kind of going into the next question that you asked around the security measures, I mean, I think one of the biggest things is DDoS attacks can occur in a small, big company, for various different reasons. One of the key things to always have is that strategy around a DDoS response. Some of the smaller companies you tend to see, and even larger companies, they outsource that mitigation to a third party. I think doing things like installing the anti-DDoS software hardware like a WAF, monitor application traffic, pen testing, various other things. But then also one of the things that I hold very true is that whole simulation factor, right? It's one thing to plan, try to prevent, but I think active simulations around DDoS are very vital to having a basic security measure that an organization can do to reduce that DDoS attack or impact to the organization.
Brilliant, thank you. And yeah, picking up on that theme of DDoS attack simulation, and see if this is obviously an area you're sort of heavily involved in. Would you be able to tell us a bit more about how DDoS attack simulations work and how effective this can be in enhancing organizations' responses to DDoS attacks?
Yes, of course. So, first of all, as also seen in the results, still not too many organizations do DDoS testing. I already recommended that in my presentation, and I would continue to recommend that. And when you do the first test against an organization, typically there is some kind of surprise. People are sometimes surprised by the results. Even if many things are mitigated, we show them that it's not protection is not perfect, and there is a lot of work to do. And this is one of the ways to also motivate the organization. It's like the organization need this hard evidence, and the management need this hard evidence that they can be taken down before they increase investment or increase their own labor in configuring and prioritizing DDoS. Typically, there are many approaches to do DDoS testing. The way that we do is a white box approach. So we first of all, we just understand what we are trying to attack. We're not just trying to attack it blindly. We're trying to understand whether it's cloud-based or that data center, whether they have application protection or network protection. And then we try to create an interesting test that the results will be fruitful. Maybe just to give an example, if the client has a CDN, we are typically not trying to run network attacks and take down a large CDN. This is not possible for us, nor for the attackers. But there are ways to bypass the CDN. So that's why we do the planning phase first. Then we do the test. The test is also a good opportunity. Typically, the customers they prefer not to invest too much time in this. They want us to do this, and their personnel will be working on other tasks. But in the test itself, they actually bring the entire team. Sometimes we have 10 people, 15 people, 20 people in the test, because it's a good opportunity for all the IT to see in how an attack looks like, how the screens look like, what is the response, what's the response time, what is if you call the vendor, what are their answers. So in the test, we typically have like a small party with some pizzas typically, and it's a very educational experience. And after that, it's very important to analyze the results, take all the metrics, and give very specific recommendation of how to improve.
Absolutely. Kevin, what kind of other tools and technologies are we seeing sort of come available in to security tools to combat DDoS attacks, and are we seeing sort of AI and machine learning sort of playing a growing role in this space?
Yeah, it seems to be, although it's like the cloud. AI is often a buzzword used, but it is a place where machine learning can easily be applied. What we're looking for is patterns. We're looking for spikes certain times of day. We're looking for patterns maybe at different areas. We're looking for IP addresses again. And we know that networks, any large network, is astronomical, the amount of events which happen at any time, even if you just have a few printers on a network. So no human could ever really cope with a glance unless you have really high level stats or some kind of dashboard which is accumulating all this information. But this is where machine learning can come in, because response is crucial, the time of response. And it might even spot the attacks which are coming in below thresholds as well. So, of course, is one of the few areas where machine learning can actually be quite effective when it comes to security. Other areas is not as clear cut, but the one area where machine learning can play a role is in intrusion detection systems or denial of service attacks. Anything again which is looking for patterns in data. And again, you're able to have the different features like IP addresses, time of day, maybe transit hops, volume as well. So it definitely is an area where machine learning will increasingly play a role.
Absolutely. And Dom, what technologies have you seen sort of be most effective in dealing with this threat? And would you have any advice for organizations about what types they should use that would suit their particular business or enterprise?
Well, I mean, as far as like different types, I mean, I'm also a big fan of AI and ML in relation to DDoS prevention. And I agree with that 100%. But then also some other good tools, and I said this earlier, was the whole. So it goes back to the old adage saying of practice makes perfect. I still think the attack simulations are a great way to test your basic security posture and your resiliency to those types of attacks. But then also that gives you a really good indication of if you're using the right tools, the right technologies, and the right people against that type of attack. So just coming back to that simulation factor again.
Definitely. Thank you very much. And then just just sort of moving on to incident response in respect of DDoS attacks. Steve, what kind of the key incident response processes you think organisations should have in place to in dealing with DDoS attacks when they do occur? I think you're on mute, Steve.
Yes, thank you. James, can I also answer the last question?
Yeah, sure.
About okay. So, and I will relate it to the incident response. So when you're in the incident response business and you don't control the time that you have to work, and you have to work on night time, weekend time, and so on. It's depending when the attacker is working. You sometimes get related to those technologies because if you're using the right technology, this is what can save the day, and everyone will be happy, and you can go back to sleep. And what I've learned in my experience that there's no silver bullet. There's no one technology that you can rely only on that, and I will explain. So there is the AI, or used to be called the behavioral technology. So sometimes they produce this amazing signature of exactly the attack pattern, and everyone is happy. And in other cases, they detected DNS attack, and they said, okay, we've detected DNS attack on your DNS server, so we decided to block this server on port 53, and it indeed stopped the attack, but also stopped the entire DNS traffic. Or if you look on the web challenges, which are very like CAPTCHA and those transparent CAPTCHA that you don't see, but they test if you are a browser or not, or the Google New reCAPTCHA and so on. So they are very powerful, but you cannot enable them on API. On API, they cannot be implemented. And so are the signatures. So if they can, Kevin mentioned LOIC, so that there are specific signatures for LOIC, so they can detect LOIC. They both detect and they identify the tool that was attacking, which is great. But for new attack patterns, they typically don't work because the signatures are always historic. So the secret sauce is combining the 2, 3, 4 relevant technologies in order to build something that you can really trust. So that's my take on it.
Thank you very much, Steve. Kevin, if I could come to you on the incident response issue and kind of what you see as the key processes for dealing with an attack when it does come around.
Yeah, I mean, this is where it's important to have contacts with your ISP or your provider, really, because again, so presuming we're in a third-party cloud provider or whatever else, or somewhere else, that at least there's staff there who can assist you, and of course you have to have your incident response plan in place, your denial of service, response to whatever happens, or have the phone numbers, and and you hope that your IT administrators understand the IP address and a subnet and everything else, which is very important. But again, just having a plan in place, that there's reasons we have the security models that we all, the ISOs 27000s, and even if they're tedious as such, but they prepare us for the inevitable, for things, because just when everything's working, and of course we're generally talking about commercial organizations again. So money, the sales is usually the bottom dollar, but again, it's only when things go wrong that the CISO's head is on the block. So it's up to them to have the plans in place for all these things. And that's why we use these capability models, or we use these security models to ensure that we're holistic, everything from the physical security right up to, our response plan to anything which happens again, which will increasingly happen in the future. Because that's where money is to be made. We forget, we forget how rich we are in the West. We really do, again. So anyone with a computer internet connection from some other continent, some other country, they are trying to make money. They can make their They can make a year's salary in a day if they get lucky. And we don't have exclusive rights on who is mathematical and who is bright in this world and who's got access to computer. So with border restrictions in place, there are no border restrictions on a computer. So again, we're going to see a lot more attacks again. So it's up to us to mitigate them again and convince our line managers to increase the budget and to allow us to hire computer security specialists who understand what they're doing, again, to protect our network or infrastructure. So
that's really, really, really good points there, Kevin. And yeah, could I get your thoughts on the whole sort of incident response processes, Dom, as well?
Yeah, no, just to probably add a little bit more to what Kevin said. I think probably the biggest piece of that is the whole mitigation process phase of the DDoS. I mean, and that's when you're under attack, being able to mitigate that impact to your environment, right? So it's just having that kind of checklist of what to do, what to terminate, to get rid of unwanted traffic. If the bottlenecks a particular app or something like that, possibly disabling it at that time, route traffic a different way, adjusting defenses, configure egress filters to block the traffic, just things like that. So it's just having that mitigation plan in place as part of that overall incident response plan to kind of have that checklist that you would have developed through whether it be a simulation previously to help mitigate that within your environment. So I think that's probably, from my perspective as a CISO, that's the biggest component of that incident response process is that mitigation factor.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I'll just wonder if you had anything to add, Ziv, to those comments.
So I have to agree with both of my colleagues. I would add that in addition to the procedures that have to be taken in place and relying on the vendors, I think most of them, if not all of them, have IR, in many cases a good incident response team. I would give the following recommendations to the audience. So it's you need also to not wait for the incident, but be proactive here. And with the vendors, I recommend to also call them in peacetime, see how much time it takes them to respond, understand what is the procedure to get immediately to the from support to escalate to the SOC or the ERT or whatever name they give their DDoS dedicated team, and be ready for that. So that's one. If you have a ransom DDoS, on the day that you get the ransom DDoS, you need to notify them already. Sometimes they can make preparations for that on their side as well. And on your team, you need to have those procedures, but we also recommend to do what we call war games, where it can be a tabletop drill, or it can be an actual simulation, where the intention is not really to test the technology. The intention is to test the team and the procedures. And when you do that, you get confidence that you have a solid procedure.
Thank you very much, guys. Really interesting stuff. And I just want to take a look at the responses to the third and final poll question before we move on. So the question was, has your organization adopted new security technologies to combat DDoS attacks in the past 2 years? 30% said yes, 36% said no, but this is something we are considering. Quarter, 25% said no, we're satisfied with our current setup, and 8% said other. So that's quite an interesting split there, when we're probably expecting to see a lot more DDoS attacks in the future. So we've had a few questions come in from the audience, so I just want to go through some of those. So we've had a question in from Aromano, which is, what type of training is recommended to the team to mitigate or minimize the impacts on the organization? And I know war games and attack simulations been mentioned a couple of times, but Kevin, is there any other types of training that you sort of think would be effective for this?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, simulations are excellent. Like for instance, AWS is a platform I'm used of and with one of my companies as well. And Red Button are actually one of AWS's test partners. Again, you just can't go in and fire off packets against your own AWS service. You have to use a partner. And Red Button are as good as anyone. Again, training. Yeah, there is training. You can go for a distributed denial of service training, but this would be your network administrators really. You can never get enough training on probably understanding networks and from the ground up. But to be honest, anyone who's really good at computer security just has a fundamental grasp of networking, because every attack really is conducted over a network. So again, the more skills you have in that and understanding just how to segment networks and routers, and again, generally that would come down to kind of industrial training, depending on the routers that you have in your network, or whether you're a Cisco or Acme or whatever, client or whoever else. So again, that's very useful, because it really is a networking issue rather than not something like, I don't know, like cross-site scripting. Of course, if you're a website, that means you have to be a developer and understand maybe how things work and your API calls and everything else. But with denial of service attacks, it really is down to networking. It's protecting your resources inside, where the traffic is coming from, understanding it, and using the right software really in place, and having capacity. But of course, yeah, I mean, I'm sure Red Button provide internal training whenever they're whenever you get a new employee, whatever else. So that would be very good. And of course, training on the particular products as well, because these are not just, you just don't buy like a Microsoft Windows denial of service protection packet and you set it up. But I mean, you have to understand what you're setting up. Otherwise, on day one you blocked your entire company and you brought down your business, your sales have been lost, whatever, one configuration. And we've seen that with there last year. I remember, sorry, I forget. Oh my God, 6 months ago, there was a huge outrage or outage, and maybe it was Amazon, whatever else. And I was on the news and people were saying, oh, is this blah, blah, blah. And I was just, my immediate response was, no, I think an engineer just typed in the wrong number. And sure enough, that's what it was. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And I'll put the same question to you, Dom.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a big fan of the simulations, the whole gamified kind of DDoS security training. I think that's quite good for somebody to do. Some of the big things that, in some other areas as far as like training that I would probably recommend, I think first of all, it needs to definitely be hands-on, but offensive and defensive from that perspective. I think it's very good for people to also understand the risk and then also the mitigation techniques, but then also to champion to Kevin as well. I think all of us security people started out as a network person way back at least I did way back in the day. So, it's understanding those network architectures and how things segment and flow from one, network zone to another, or one network technology to another. And I think that's quite vital in that aspect of that.
Thank you very much. And Ziv, do you have anything else to add to that question?
Yes. So, I had back then a big incident with an organization that was attacked very intensively for a few days and even for a few weeks, and there was a lot of issues and outages and business impact. And when such an event happened, the entire IT, or 80% of the IT, is working nonstop on the event. And when eventually they got over it, at least you say, okay, now everyone knows what DDoS is all about. They understand how the attacks works, and they know how to operate the mitigation technologies. They know how to contact the vendors, and they have good procedures. The question is how to do it before such an intensive event. And there are processes to do so. I would maybe, if I may, start with step one, first grade. From a CISO or CIO point of view, you first need to see that the IT speaks what I call speaks DDoS fluently. Okay, and sometimes when people don't speak DDoS fluently, they just speak about, okay, we have this vendor or that vendor, and which vendor is better, and they talk. It's really they talk about the surface. Well, when you see a team, an IT team, not everyone has to be on, of course, on the same level, but the security team and the network team, they have to speak DDoS fluently. They have to understand what is the what are the web challenges and the behavior and the AI, and what are the network protection, like for example how the scene cooking works and so on. And when you see that your team is speaking about this level, you get confidence that they will be able to understand what is happening in the next attack and block it.
Thank you very much, Steve. Very interesting answer there. Had another question in from Aramano, which is in a case where there's a successful DDoS attacks, beside the operational impacts, would it be possible to measure the cost impacts, such as ROM, on the organisation? So, Dom, could I come to you with that one?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I would treat it just like any type of variable metric. If the business was brought down by, it's not retrospective to a particular DDoS attack, but a security breach or incident that would normally take your business offline, I would equate it to that type of similar impact and that cost factor that you would have gauged from that perspective, because ultimately what it's doing is just creating enough traffic, if it's successful to, shut down your app, your website. So and that's a really big cost impactive to yourself as a business as well as a CISO. So that's the metric that I would map to, would be just a stereotypical security or breach type outage metric of if the business was offline for this amount of hours, what's that relative cost to the business.
Brilliant, thank you. Kevin, do you have anything to add to that at all? Oh, you're on mute.
Yes. Sorry, was that addressed to me?
Kevin.
Oh, Kevin, sorry. Yeah.
Sorry, you were breaking up. What was it? Sorry, was that about the incident response?
No, this was a question from the audience about if in the event of a successful attack, beside the operational impacts, is it possible to measure the cost impacts on the organizations, and how would you advise this be done?
Yeah, well, straight away you can work with the salaries of the people who are working on the problem. You can work out what sale dips you had, things like that, and then whether or not it affected confidence in your side again. So again, pretty much you could measure in any basic way, but how accurate that is. But yeah, there is some. I mean, yeah, there are features you could easily track and give an estimate of the cost.
Thank you.
And of course, cyber insurance companies have, would be interested, I mean, because it's become such a leading thing now, that there are metrics that they would have as well, cyber insurance companies.
Definitely, yeah. And Ziv, just wondered if you had any further response to that.
Yes. So I have to say this is a typical measuring the potential impact, and especially when you need to make a decision about investing quite a lot of money in better DDoS mitigation. So you need to balance the things, and sometimes and we really try to assist organizations to do it, and we have the templates, and but you also need to get information from the customer. You need to understand what is the cost of the impact, and it's a very complicated process to do. I do recommend of doing that this process, at least to have some kind of understanding what is at stake. In some cases, there's no question. It's obviously that if the organization will be down, that will be above $1 million a day, and that's worthwhile investing, let's say, 200K USD annually in DDoS mitigation. So in some cases, it's not. It's a very clear decision, a very no-brainer decision. In some cases, it's a more complicated decision. The thing that you need to compile is when you think about outage is the direct revenue that you will lose. Okay, so for example, if you're an online site and you have 1 hour of outage, how much business transaction will you lose? The second one is reputation. So for banks, or at least for some banks, they are not so much worried about the transactions that they will lose. They are worried that their name will be in the 6 o'clock news. So the reputation is more at stake. And finally, it's also a question about liability, legal liability, because if you have downtime and you're let's say a trading company, then your customers can say, I wasn't able to execute a very important trading that was supposed, a very important currency exchange, and I lost a lot of money. And you can lose a lot of money in these legal procedures. Sometimes even if you eventually will not have to pay so much, just trying to protect yourself against all those lawsuits is going to be very expensive. So you need to comply all those factors and based on that, reach a decision.
Thank you very much. And unfortunately, that's all we've got time for in today's session. So big thank you to Ziv, Kevin and Dom for your insights and your time this afternoon. Really appreciate it. And a big thank you as well to Red Button for their sponsorship of this webinar. For details on upcoming info security webinars, please see our website. And remember, you can rate the session, tell us what you liked or areas you'd like us to improve upon in the future. But with that, thank you everyone for listening today. This session is now ending.